What was the biggest screw up in history? Mao ordering the mass killing of birds because he thought they would eat the corn off the farms and compromise the harvest. In the end, the lack of birds led to an explosive growth in parasite populations that destroyed the harvest completely in some areas. What followed was a massive famine killing millions. When Ronald Wayne sold his 10% stake in Apple for $800, that would be worth $35 billion today. The beginning of the universe. This has made a lot of people very angry and has been widely regarded as a bad move. In 2003, a lost hunter let a signal flare near San Diego. The flare started a fire that would later spread to become the biggest one in the history of California. The fire destroyed an estimated 300,000 acres, 2,322 homes, and killed 14 people. In terms of the entertainment industry, Blockbuster turning down an offer to buy Netflix. Invading Russia. 1666 Great Fire of London. Started by a baker who left a pie in the oven too long. Perhaps the bigger fuck up was that most of the buildings were made of wood and built very close together. That grad student who killed the world's oldest tree trying to measure its age, not accepting Hitler to art school. Operation Cottage, 1943. US and Canada landed on the island of Kiska, which had been occupied by Japanese forces. They successfully took control over the island. Though 32 soldiers lost their lives, 50 soldiers were wounded, and 191 soldiers went missing. The fuck up. The Japanese weren't there. They had secretly left the island 2 weeks prior to the assault. I always think the fact that the Union Carbide/Bhopal disaster is so little known today is atrocious, given that it may be the biggest fuck up in history. It's certainly the world's worst industrial disaster. Basically, there was a pesticide plant in India where management severely underinvested in basic safety procedures, from equipment to training. So there was a giant chemical pesticide leak into the surrounding urban areas in the middle of the night in December 1984. Complicating things further, we still have no idea just what chemicals were released. Union Carbide never released that info, but we do know that 30 tons of it was this stuff. No one knows for sure how many people died either, but the estimates range from 4,000 to 16,000 depending on who you believe, with 500,000 injured. It's believed that the groundwater at the site is still contaminated by chemicals, and many of the people who live in the surrounding area are still drinking it. For reference, the Chernobyl disaster is estimated to have caused 4,000 deaths when it's all said and done from cancer. I remember first hearing about this a few years ago and being stunned that I'd never heard about it, then angry when I realized the reason was likely that very few people care when thousands of poor people die in India. To discuss it 3 decades later, even if it is considered the world's worst industrial disaster. The 1917 Halifax explosion. In the morning of December 6, 1917, the French cargo ship Mont Blanc was carrying munitions from New York through Halifax, ultimately to go to Bordeaux, France. As it made its way into the Halifax harbor, it made a collision with the Norwegian vessel SS Emo. The Emo was traveling through the harbor at an accelerated rate. Having had been delayed earlier in the day, it was attempting to make up for time. Despite repeated attempts at advising the Emo to slow down, the captain disregarded them and continued through at high speeds. The Emo would eventually meet its fate as it began towards a head-on collision with the Mont Blanc. At this point, both ships were aware of the potential collision, and both had shut their engines off to prevent significant damage. A forced stop wasn't used by the Mont Blanc for fear that doing so may set off its cargo. Eventually the two ships were steered to the point where they had become parallel, the Mont Blanc passing the Emo, avoiding a collision. The Emo, for whatever reason, decided to go in reverse, causing its head to swing into the Mont Blanc. Initial damage wasn't severe. The problem though was that barrels of benzol toppled over and began to spill out. As the Emo restarted its engines, it flew out sparks, igniting the benzol vapors. The resulting explosion released an energy equivalent to 2.9 kilotons of TNT, at the time the largest man-made explosion until the development of nuclear weapons. The explosion obliterated all nearby structures, completely destroying the nearby community of Richmond, killing around 2,000 people, and resulting in the injuries of another 9,000. It was a blast so powerful that it ended up creating a tsunami, which subsequently wiped out a native population who were living on Tufts Cove. Pieces of the Mont Blanc were scattered, traveling miles away from the initial blast area, its main gun reportedly traveling 3.5 miles north. It was so loud that the explosion was said to be heard over 100 miles away, all because the captain of the Emu was feeling a bit impatient that day. While not the biggest, it was still a pretty bad fuck up. The Prohibition, it failed completely to stop people from drinking, caused tons of deaths and injuries because people would drink anything with alcohol in it, including paint thinner. It also gave rise to massive organized crime and the most famous mobster ever, Al Capone. The Fourth Crusade. It started as a crusade for Jerusalem from an invasion through Egypt, and the Crusaders ended up invading Croatia and Constantinople. This also led to the weakening of the Byzantine Empire and eventually its downfall. Cast your minds back to WWI. The Allies had no good ideas on how to make machine gun bullets go through spinning propellers for their fighter planes. The running method was to mount the guns on top of the wings, where they would be hard to aim and harder to operate. Then one night, a German pilot was flying along in his Interjupiter gear-equipped fighter, but got lost in the bad weather. Eventually, he saw an airfield and landed, safe and sound. Unfortunately for him, it was an Allied airfield, and the West had just captured the all-important interrupter gear. Stalin ignoring all intel that said the Nazis were planning an invasion. The Soviets knew everything about Operation Barbarossa. They knew the exact date and time, troop numbers and positions, etc. Stalin himself had no less than 84 different sources tell him that Hitler was planning an invasion, and he ignored them all as a plot by Churchill to get him to turn on Hitler. His paranoia cost millions of lives. Outside of political moves, probably the time Western Union told Alexander Graham Bell to fuck off with his toy, the telephone. They offered the patent to Wu for $100K, 2 meters today, and 2 years later Wu's president regretted it, saying if he could buy it for $25 million, 550 meters today, it would be a bargain. Bell went on to start what would be American Telephone and Telegraph, AT&T. The execution of Genghis Khan's envoy by the Shah of Khwarezm, Persia or modern-day Iran, more or less. Genghis Khan legitimately wanted to trade with them in order to fund his war with China. Instead, the Shah decides to insult the smelly Mongol and kill his representative. This, of course, infuriated the Great Khan, leading to the Mongol invasion of first Khwarezm and then the rest of the Middle East, resulting in the complete destruction of his kingdom and devastation of the entire region. Millions of deaths and the eventual burning of Baghdad, one of the world's greatest cities and great repositories of knowledge. This legitimately could have changed the course of world history. At the time, the Islamic world was the richest and best educated region of the world. They had the largest cities, the best scientists and artists, and were generally tolerant of other cultures, especially in comparison to Europe at the time. All of that was burnt to the ground because one ruler was a dickhead who didn't want to treat with a smelly Mongol. Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812. He marched the Grand Army 680,000 soldiers strong into Russia in June, and they retreated in December with only 120,000 survivors. Imagine losing 560,000 men in 5 months. The Japanese failed to deliver their declaration of war before the attack on Pearl Harbor. They had hoped the sudden loss of all the Pacific Fleet's battleships would have been enough of a blow to force a negotiated peace, but the feeling of betrayal instead galvanized Americans like nothing before, and saw high school students walking out of class and factory workers walking off the line to go enlist. The US was so incensed that chances of a negotiated peace were killed instantly. I'd have to say the Agent.btz virus, it was so strong that the Pentagon couldn't defeat it. It was found on a USB stick in a parking lot. In the middle 1800s, a South African Xhosa woman, non-Koyus, prophesied that her tribe would receive divine powers if they obeyed the spirits of her ancestors by killing all of their cattle and destroying their crops. After realizing that they had destroyed their food source, around 78,000 Xhosa tribe members starved due to the resulting famine. In the beginning the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad move. Douglas carried ADAMS. Chernobyl was right up there on the pretty big fuck up list. Hey look, it's a boat with some white people on it. I'll go see what they want. disbanding the Iraqi army after the USA took over Iraq. How could letting hundreds of thousands of armed unemployed young men go home be a bad idea? In my view, the destruction of both the library in Alexandria by multiple people and the library in Baghdad by Genghis Khan, which destroyed invaluable books and manuscripts before they could be duplicated. Many satyr plays, Sophocles' works, possibly the recipe for Greek fire, and more are now permanently gone because empires are greedy for resources. Enzo Ferrari insults a tractor maker, creates his biggest competition. Ferruccio Lamborghini was a simple man born into a family who farmed grapes for a living. His mechanical knowledge and interest eventually lead him to enter the business of making tractors. During World War II, most of Italy's industrial output would be related to war needs, thus neglecting other needs like agricultural equipment. This is why after the war and due to post-war reform initiatives, his tractor manufacturing became very popular and lucrative. So business was doing well for Ferruccio. After some years he even started other companies that manufactured oil heaters and air conditioners. And so he buys a Ferrari, being that he loves tinkering with cars and Ferrari is a prestigious car brand affordable only to the successful and powerful. He traveled all the way to Maranello to purchase a Ferrari 250 Great. After owning it for some time, he then noticed that it had an inferior clutch that would always break and would force him to bring the car all the way back to Maranello over and over. He brings up the complaint all the way to the owner, Enzo Ferrari, and argued to him that his tractors had better clutches than Ferrari cars. Pride-filled Enzo Ferrari shrugged off his complaint, thinking that a mere farmer had nothing against the prestige and pedigree of his Ferrari cars. This is what pushed Ferruccio Lamborghini into the business of automobiles. If only Enzo Ferrari lowered his pride, his company wouldn't have to deal with what is now a very significant competition. The Emu War. I can't link it, I'm on mobile, but it was basically the Australian army fighting the dreaded emu with machine guns and the soldiers couldn't stop the constant emu assault. Like, how do you fuck up that much? Your soldiers. Hannibal Schmannibal. He won't dare attack Rome. Oh shit, he attacked Italy? Send a big army to take him head on. They were massacred by Hannibal's forces. Send another one. Seriously, for a while, it looked like Rome was being led by Zap Brannigan.